As I said, my name is Fred Bell. I am the managing director of the Palm Springs Air Museum. I'm also on the board of directors, and on behalf of the board, I would like to thank all of you for coming out today as we recognize all of these fantastic individuals and accept this aircraft into our collection. It is one of the most exciting things that I can do. And I can't say that I'm not a little bit nervous here, because I'm going to be, some of these folks you're going to hear from today are icons in aviation. They are the people that when they talk about, they write stuff, these guys wrote the book. And so please, if I could have you all rise for our presentation of colors.
Okay. Forward. March.
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Please be seated. Let's hear it. Those are the Palm Springs High School Junior Air Force, ROTC. What a great bunch of kids, huh? All right, now I have the distinct honor of introducing a gentleman who really needs no introduction to do our invocation, Father Howard Lincoln from Sacred Heart Church. Father.
Please let us pray. Dear Lord, we thank you for all of our blessings. Please fill our hearts with gratitude for all that we have. We ask you to enkindle our hearts with a greater appreciation for those that have served our country. Please bless them, especially those who have given their lives in the service of our nation. Please bless their families, and especially, Lord, bless our country. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Father. In this hangar, you see the product. I was reflecting the other day on the amount of time. I have actually been here about 16 years, but I've actually been involved in the operation about 4. January will be the 4th year. And in this hangar, you see the product behind me and on the other side, the F-105, the F-4, the F-104. There are some other aircrafts and helicopters in the museum. The product that we stepped into expanding our collection. And the Vietnam aircraft, for me, have a little bit of a special place because when I was a young man, I was too young to be drafted, but my next door neighbor, his name was Russ Goodman. His father was lost in an F-4 in a low-level mission in Vietnam. And I remember that quite clearly when they came to the house and talking to the family. And every time we dedicate one of these aircraft, we've got Gordo here from last year, and we've had the F-161 guys here previously. Every time we dedicate one of these, I go back to that and how difficult it was for the family. I said something last night when we had a little get-together for the folks to see the airplane for the first time. And that was that we cannot allow what happened to these guys when they came home, and they did not get honored, to ever happen again. We have, as a country, separated, I think, at this point, The man from the mission. The mission may not be popular, but the man is recognized. The man comes home, the man is recognized. But the guys from Vietnam never really got that. They stood on the ramparts in the Cold War. They fought the Cold War. Many of them paid the ultimate price. Many of them came back, and the country at the time never really said collectively, we appreciate it. We learned from that subsequently that we never allowed that to happen to the Gulf War folks or anyone who's gone up and stood on that wall and defended us. But the Vietnam guys never really got that. So as we are inducting these aircraft and these legends, these gentlemen, into our facility and remembering them in perpetuity, they will be honored. Their names will never go away. We need to remember they never got that. So thank them. When you see them, shake their hand. Say thank you. Nobody realizes F-105 guys, 50% casualty rate. You know, they lost 50% of those aircraft in Vietnam. Can you imagine what would have happened now if we had sent an air wing into combat and half of those guys didn't come back? There would be pandemonium. We don't accept those kinds of losses anymore. But be perfectly honest, and again, I think that I know a little bit about this. I didn't realize that there was a 50% casualty rate for F-105s. It was never widely published. I didn't know it. F-104, 25% casualty rate. And I can go on and on. F-4, whatever one, Sandy's, the search and rescue guys, the SAR guys, very, very heavy casualties. We never really, I think, truly understood the level of sacrifice that these men gave when they strapped on these airplanes. So when you're doing this today, remember that. Remember all of the men who sacrificed and gave up their lives, and these gentlemen who are here today and whose names will live on in perpetuity at this museum. So that is my sermonizing for the day after Father Lincoln. You know, when we started on this program, we said, okay, we're going to embark and do Vietnam airplanes, and we started looking around, and we said, okay, well, let's do a 104. And we were talking about it, and I ran into this guy who had lunch with me and my son. We were here, and it was so nice to my boy at the table, and he was saying, you know, I flew A-10s, and I flew F-104s, and suddenly I realized that he not only fly F-104s, but he was also an Edwards test pilot. And the guy's name was Bob Lilac. And he was so gracious to my kid, and I about choked on my sandwich when I realized that I started listening to this as he's talking to my son, because I started putting all this together, and I went, oh, this guy's a pretty major dude. And last night I learned, you know, he can do all kinds of interesting things too. He's quite a leaper. But the reality was, very humble man. And if it weren't for Bob Lilac, this project would not have happened. He was instrumental in making it happen. He was a key driving force. Not only was he instrumental in making it happen, but from a standpoint of the detail that he put into this airplane, coming out and making sure that we got it right, that he was checking, and that he was a repository of information. We could not have done it without Bob. So without further delay, and I've built him up, Colonel, U.S. Air Force retired, Bob Lilac. Bob, come on up here.
Fred's a hard act to follow. Just to keep it as casual as we possibly can, I just want to say how proud I am to be a part of the museum, led by Fred, his staff, and the 300 plus volunteers who really make this museum what it is to the community. It's a tribute to the community, it's a tribute to the history of aviation, and it's a wonderful asset that we've got to continue to support forever. The restoration and maintenance team that put this airplane in the shape it's in today, it's so beautiful. Job well done, guys. You did a great job. I I was lucky enough to be able to fly the F-104 in many of its roles. I got to fly it up at George Air Force Base. I got to fly it in combat, 2 tours in combat, first time at Da Nang, second time at Udorn. And later on, I got to try to teach the Germans how to fly. Some people say I didn't do a very good job at Luke Air Force Base in the F-104G. And then later on, I flew it up at Edwards. And we've got Colonel Radomski here today who will talk a little bit about the 104 at Edwards. But I was really lucky, and talk about blowing your mind. I got to fly a version of this that had a rocket in the tail. You remember the movie The Right Stuff? Chuck Yeager jumped out of one. We only built 3, and there were 2 left, and I was selected to fly one of the 2 and got to fly it up over 100,000 feet. That was a real kick in the butt. It was fantastic. And it's a pleasure to be here with everybody. As Fred said, we've got a lot of icons here. We've got Lockheed test pilots like Bob Gilliland, Suitcase Simpson. There's probably others here that I don't even know about. I know I've met 3 or 4 people that worked on the airplane at Lockheed Burbank. We're really proud and honored to have Phil Smith with us. Phil was shot down in September 1965, a year before our dedicatee, Norm Schmidt, was shot down. Phil was a prisoner of war for 7.5 years, the only U.S. Air Force pilot held by the Chinese throughout the entire Vietnam War, and we're happy to have Phil here with us today. I'm really proud of everybody being here, to have veterans, to have people that support veterans, and all you patriots. I mean, it's heartbreaking to see all you here and saying congratulations to us. Specifically, Fred and I and some members of the board and a few other people made a decision when we got this airplane that we wanted to make it a tribute airplane in memoriam to one person that paid the ultimate sacrifice, Colonel Norm Schmidt. Norm was my flight commander. I promise I get emotional to you. Anyway, Norm was my flight commander, and on September the 1st, 1966, Norm was shot down over the southern part of North Vietnam by anti-aircraft fire. He delivered his ordnance on target, was shot down, ejected. Sandy's search and rescue airplanes tried to go in and get him. 2 Sandys were shot down. I was airborne about 15 minutes later, flying over the top of them. And we did not get to Norm before the bad guys did. You may know that story, but Norm was POW in the Hanoi Hilton, and about a year later was taken away for interrogation and didn't come back. We have his family here today, daughters, his wife, and I'd like to just say thank you all for making this a great day, and I'd like to invite Marie Schmidt up here to say a few words. We'll come to you, Marie. You don't have to. We'll get you down there. Okay. Here we go.
My son-in-law, Kim Zupan, who is going to be a famous author. He is a famous author of his first novel, The Plowman. I said, I'm going to make a pitch on that because we're so proud of him. It's been out for a month, Henry Holt Publishing, so look for it. Kim Zupan. Anyway, I would like the rest of my family to stand up. 2 daughters, Kathy and Karen, both could not make it, but I have others. I have my son. We lost our son, unfortunately. Partly, I think, because we lost his dad. It had a lot to do with it. But I'd like Janet Zupan, Kim's wife, and Johanna, the baby, and Ivan Dira, who is with us, and my very dear friend, Joan Deskin, who lives next door to me, thank God. We help each other. Is that everybody? Did I get you all? Okay, well, Kathy and Karen will really feel. Karen is married to Carl Engelhardt, who many of you remember. Dutch Engelhardt was a 104 Squadron commander, and he and Karen started going together when they were in 7th grade. And before Norman left for Vietnam, he said, now, these are the 2 boys I want you to marry, Kathy and Karen, and he had pictures of Carl and Bruce up on the fireplace. But anyway, I think he knows that Karen and Carl got married. So in any event, I just wanted to speak a little, very short, I won't belabor the point. My husband, Norm, came back from Korea, where he flew F-86s, and the one called Sweet Marie is in the bottom of the North Korean Ocean, and because Booz Plassé shot up a Russian MiG, and it flew into Norm's intake, and so he had to bail out in North Korea, so that's where the plane Sweet Marie is. So anyway, when we got back, Norm went to work. He was assigned to Kirtland Air Force Base from 1952 to 60. That's a long time. But he was in the 49 25th Test Group Fighter Atomic. So we have to guess what he was doing. I mean, we never talked about it. But the building was in the middle of about 4 acres of chain link fence, and so we never got to go in there. And he flew when he first came, the testing, there would come these new jets right off the line. It was a peach of a job for him. He flew F-86s, F-84, RF-84, F-100, and then the 104 came, and they let him go back to Lockheed to pick it up. And it was a huge deal at Kirtland Air Force Base. So he had the base call me, and he's on his way, and he wants you to come out for the landing. Well, of course, the landing is in this secret area, and so I went out, got a babysitter. We always had lots of kids. And so I stood behind the fence that's quite a ways away from the runway, and I watched him make, honestly, I'm not kidding, it was the most perfect landing I have ever seen. It was just lit, you know? And so they had the generals out there and the red carpet, and the poor pregnant waif is standing behind the fence going, hey, Norm, and he is so wrapped up in all this glory and hot fighter pilot stuff, he didn't even see me. And so I wasn't happy. And I went home, and pretty soon he calls, and I said, you made a perfect landing. It was absolutely beautiful. I was there. You didn't see me. Bang. You know? And so 24 yellow roses later, when he opened the front door, I'm sorry. Well, anyway, that's all I wanted to tell you, because the 104 became absolutely his second love affair. I mean, the kids and I were pretty first, but that plane, he absolutely loved it. And it was, we went 2 years after this to Taiwan, and then 2 years to Langley. He was a maintenance test pilot there. And the wing commander of George saw Norman there, and he says, what are you doing here? Why don't you come fly the 104 with us guys? And honestly, a month later, we were out of the house. He went back to George and got Norm reassigned. And so that's the story of Norman and the 104. And it's a horrible ending, but you know, you do what you have to do. And he was a very super individual, wonderful father. And, you know, he was missing in action to us for 8 years. And then his remains came back in 1974. So that's my story of Norman and the 104. But there's a lot more, but that's enough. Thank you.
Let's hear it again for her. Isn't that fantastic? Now, the next gentleman that I'm going to introduce, Bob asked me the talking points, and the two talking points on the next guy are probably two things, key things. He really is the driving force, or was the driving force, behind the A-10 at the time, flew that aircraft, and if you know the A-10, he is the guy. And the other thing is he's president of the Test Pilots Association, and I think that about says it all. As the president of the Test Pilots Association, the president of those guys, they must like you a lot, right? And he's a great guy, Buzz Lynch, Colonel, U.S. Air Force retired. Buzz, want to come on up?
Well, my talk is a little different because it's basically a test point that we did out of Edwards, and Bob Gilliland was part of it. He doesn't know yet I'm going to be talking about him. But anyway, it's an interesting phase of the flight test in the Mojave Desert, and so I'd like to go into my talk. First, you get your glasses on. I too would like to thank everyone for turning our 104 into a truly beautiful bird. Thanks again to the hands-on mechanics, the volunteers, the museum staff, and everyone who contributed. I would also like to acknowledge my family and friends here today. We are very fortunate to have such a fine piece of history for generations to enjoy. Over the years, I have been involved at Edwards Air Force Base as a test pilot in developmental testing. Many of the tests that I did had to do with a 104, which is a pretty neat airplane. One of the roles that we got into in the flight test business at Edwards had to do with sharing the spotlight and the performing of a 104. And we looked at the advanced nature of this great interceptor. In this case, the test aircraft was the SR-71 Blackbird, which Bob is very, very familiar with. I happen to be, for this test mission, I happen to be the chase aircraft in a 104. The task of the 104 was to monitor, support, and ensure flight clearance of the SR-71. From takeoff at Edwards, our formation flight to climb to the eastern slopes of the High Sierras, and then over to the Owens Valley, and then into Bishop. The aircraft were supersonic as we approached Bishop. All the while we were flying up in the Bishop area, the chase aircraft had climbed to an altitude of about 45,000 feet. I was visually checking the Blackbird for fluid leaks and structural integrity. Under these conditions, only the 104 could fulfill this vital safety check. I'm sure Bob can testify to that. After much data gathering, I performed a final inspection of the SR-71, and with the 104 approaching bingo fuel, we'd only been airborne now for about minutes, but he was getting low on fuel. I said sayonara to the Blackbird, and he jetted off into the uber space. This was quite a sight to see, a beautiful SR-71 pulling away from the flight. I then throttled back and came out of the afterburner for a max range descent into the traffic pattern at Edwards. After this 20-minute flight over God's country, it was time to land, taxi in and debrief. Mission well accomplished. As I look at the beautifully restored F-104 here in the hangar, she even looks fast, like the racehorse that she really is. As a test pilot with many memories and stories to tell, I know now how fortunate I was to experience this ride of a lifetime in the Mojave Desert. And that's all I have.
Please, let's hear it for both of these gentlemen. Now, the next person that I get to introduce is a living legend. You want to come on over here? Bob? Come on over here. Bob Gilliland. These guys, to put it in context, this is literally like having the Wright brothers come and introduce the Wright Flyer into the museum. That's the level that these guys were at in supersonic flight aircraft. So Bob, you want to say a few words? There you go.
Thank you very much for coming and permitting me to be the part of this crowd here today. And I want to thank Fred Bell and Bob Lalick and Buzz and the others as well. And I've been involved with this 104, and I could say a few words about its origin because I worked for the man who designed it, Kelly Johnson. His real name is Clarence L. Johnson. He's from upstate Michigan, and he was born in this country, but his parents were immigrants from Sweden, so he was pure-blooded Swede. And he said he was from a poor family and worked his way through Ann Arbor. And I said, how'd you do it? By waiting on tables, etc. He said, well, a little of that, but mainly tutoring the dullards. That gives you an insight into his persona right there. And so he came out and got hired by Lockheed in 1931. And Lockheed, as you may or may not know, went before the auction block, bankruptcy, $40,000, and Bob Gross from Philadelphia bought it. And the judge says, sold, and then he leans over and says, well, young man, I sure hope you know what you're doing, because $40,000 in the Depression was big bucks. And so then they couldn't hire him that year, so they said, go back and take this model and try it out in the wind tunnel back there in Ann Arbor, and that became the first one that he did. And it was because everything had been single engine airplanes prior to this, and here we are in the beginning of the 30s. And so it was the Electra, the Lockheed Electra, and Hall Hibbert of Glendale had designed that. And I remember Kelly told me one time, I said, did Hall Hibbert design this airplane? And he says, he designed it and I redesigned it. And he's the one who put the small tail behind each engine, because they didn't know anything about twin engine airplanes then. And so that is the one that led up to the first thing that Lockheed had of any substantial thing. In 1938, they sold it the Hudson Bomber, they called it. And that was the one in Great Britain, and they made that useful in Great Britain, and Neville Chamberlain went down there to meet Hitler. He flew one of Kelly's airplanes down there to do that. But then during the war, their employment zoomed up almost to 100,000 people. And you may have heard of the Lockheed Skunk Works. That stands for ADP, Advanced Development Projects. And so Hap Arnold, who was the only five-star general in any branch, he was controlling the Pentagon then. And so he called up Kelly and says, I want you to design an airplane for this new jet engine. and the British had one, and the Germans had one, but we had none. And so that was in March of 1943 that the Skunk Works got created. And so he went to Bob Gross, who ran the company, the owner, primary owner, and he said, Hap Arnold wants to do this, and I would like to do it. He says, I'm not risking the equity of this company on any crazy thing like a jet fighter. And he said, we've got every engineer here. We're doing 17 P-38s a day right here in Burbank, and they had camouflage over there. In those days, they still thought the Japanese might move in. And so, his first jet was the P-80 Shooting Star. And that was the first American jet that shot down an enemy airplane. And that was over in the Korean War. And the Korean War was the origin of this thing here behind me. I wanted to tell you how the origin of the 104 occurred. When Harry Truman, remember we had downsized all of our military, all branches. And also after World War II, they had created the U.S. Air Force. So I'm from the Naval Academy. And so only 30 days before I was to graduate, they offered an opportunity to volunteer to go in the USAF. So they wound up taking, they only could take 2% to be pilots and 4% non-pilots of those first Annapolis guys. So the graduating class was just under 800. And so I was one of them who got in on that deal. And 16 of us were sent to Randolph Field, San Antonio, Texas. And it was down there that I soloed for the first time. That was in the T-6. They used to call it the AT-6 when it was advanced, because earlier in the war, when they were expanding so rapidly, they had primary and basic and advanced. And a lot of people call it AT-6, but we didn't call it that. And so after that, then I got sent over there to Arizona and flew the 80. And then they had the 80A and the 80B and then the 80C. And a lot of you probably have not heard about this. They sent a letter to Kelly Johnson's right-hand man and told him, and I've seen that letter, and it was just a one-page letter. It said after much discussions and disputes and arguments, and a lot of people like Yeager for one, but there were many others, said, we never had a two-seated P-51 or F-104 or any of the other fighters, and we don't need one now. But they said we've decided we'll order 12, only 12, and tell all your subcontractors over there in the whole area around Burbank that we'll never order any more. Well, they wound up ordering 5,700 of them, and we called it the T-6. And 95% of all the free world pilots flew the T-6 at one time or another. And so getting to the origin of this F-104 now, when the Korean War broke out in June 25, 1950, and Harry Truman was the one that surprised everybody by entering. And we didn't, all the earlier wars, you know, we had what the Constitution says, that the Congress has the right to declare war. But so nobody had declared war here, so at first they called it a police action. And this friend of mine up at F-86 in Korea, and I was over there in F-84s at Daegu, K2 Airport, Daegu down there, flying 84s. And I was so grateful. I'd been in Germany flying them for 2 years before I got into combat, because some of these guys that started flying in that war had 30 hours in the jet before they entered the war. And so Jimmy Tabera was up there. I read Stars and Stripes. I didn't know him then. And he was the first American ace over there. But anyway, they said, how do you feel about this non-war, this police action? His answer I thought was pretty funny. He says, well, I sure rather try to shoot them down over here than over Wichita. He was from Wichita, and his dad worked for either Cessna or Beach, I forgot which. And they've named a little airport for him up there now. And later on, he got in the 104, and he said if North American Aviation had built this thing instead of Lockheed, they'd have built 1,500 of them right out of the box. He was a squadron commander of the 104s up in Massachusetts. And so anyway, Hap Arnold called up Kelly and also Lee Atwood, co-founder of North American, who was a good friend of mine too. And they said, you two guys go over there and find out talk to the people and find out what kind of airplane you want to come back and do. So they did, and they said, these guys, they said, we want something that's faster than our opponents, climbs higher than the opponents, etc. It's always been that way and still is. And so Kelly comes back and designs this 104, and Mr. Atwood went back and was head of the team at North American that designed the F-100. That's called a Super Sabre. And so, Kelly, it was in the mid-50s when the 104 first flight was made by Tony LaVere. And I'm here to assert that he's the #1 experimental test pilot of any of the American pilots. That includes anybody and everybody, in my opinion. And Tony also was first flight of the U-2 airplane. And that was a super secret thing done with CIA. And Kelly himself was paranoid on security and very patriotic too, I might add. And so the 104 came along and made this first flight about the same time the U-2 did. And then it started getting some of the bugs out of the thing, and it has a J79 engine, and Fred Bell told me that they have the engine to go to this thing, and it could be resuscitated and flown easily if they've got that engine going good now. And so I hope it does happen. And then that'd be great, wouldn't it? And so at any rate, you had the 104A model and B model. The B model was two-seated version of the A, and then they improved it a little bit and had the C model and D model, and the D model was a two-seated version too. But the big one was the F-104G, and that was because we had a consortium going around. The Japanese built it, and the Canadians, and I flew it out of Taiwan, and also Europe. And so Kelly Johnson had me come into his office, and he said, I know you love that 104, and I want you to know something here. He said, I got something here that's faster than the 104. I mean, he was leading up to the SO-71. He said, you love the 104, but it goes faster than the 104, goes higher than the 104, goes further than the 104, and he stands up and says, let's go take a look at it. So his office wasn't very far from the floor where the original one was. It hadn't flown yet. And so I could tell it immediately I liked it and I wanted to do that. But I didn't know at first what they were doing, and it was going to be one of those vertical things like Herman Salmon did. I wouldn't have gone for that. I'd have spoken sayonara and returned to the 104, and I was flying it about 7 days a week then. And so it's a very streamlined machine. As you can see, it's got negative dihedral on those wings, and the wings are 3 inches thick in the thickest place, which precludes any ability to put any hydraulics in there. And so Kelly also designed a thing on the starboard side of the cockpit, and you could push a button and get that thing out, and it's called a RAT, R-A-T, RAT. That's a ram air turbine. And when the airplane's gliding, then it'll rev up the turbine, and it'll give you hydraulics and also electronics, and hydraulics and so that. But we found we never needed it because of the engine here, J79. Then it would. While you're gliding the airplane, it would rev it up, and it wouldn't cause a bearing failure as it did in some other engines. And so you could get all you needed of both both products, the hydro and the electronics, without having to use the RAT, because your engine wouldn't be producing any thrust back there. I myself have had 5 dead stick landings in the 104, and it's a lot safer just simply jumping out. And we had the jump out thing here goes down. That's unusual. 104 goes down because he feared he couldn't ejected successfully with that high T tail without hitting the tail at Mach 2. That was a Pentagon requirement. And so, anyway, I don't want to take too much time here, Fred. So I better sign off. I can keep talking forever.
Well, let's hear it for him. There's his son, Rob. 5 dead stick landings in a 104. Yeah, that is why I would fly the SR-71. Probably after the second dead stick landing, I don't know. All right, Phil Smith, can you join us up here, please? Say a few words. Phil, let's hear it for Phil.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to be here today to take part in the dedication of the F-104 Starfighter to the Palm Springs Air Museum. I had the privilege of flying this magnificent airplane at the time the F-104 held all 3 world records for top speed, highest rate of climb, and greatest altitude. It set the world record of 103,395 feet back in the 1950s. I flew one up to 94,000, where you can actually see the curvature of the Earth. I flew the F-86, the F-100, the F-4, but my favorite was the 104. During the Vietnam War, I was shot down with Tonkin Gulf, captured and held as a POW for 7.5 years by the Chinese communists. Those of us who spent time in enemy hands always knew it was our duty to return with honor. And we also knew that some of our comrades would die trying to do just that. I was one of the lucky ones. I survived and made it home. And Norm Smith, who we honor today, was one that didn't come back. We shall always remember those who made this sacrifice and their families. God bless them and all of you, and I'm sure the addition of the 104 to this fine air museum will be appreciated and cherished for many for years to come. Thank you.
And you know, in aviation, there's always legacy, and that legacy leads to today. I'd like to introduce Colonel Radomansky. He is the Vice Commander of the Test Wing at Edwards Air Force Base. Can I get that close enough?
Well, good afternoon, everyone. When the museum reached out to Edwards and asked us to send somebody down for this ceremony, I was very excited. I have to say, on a personal level, I've been to the museum before, and what struck me was that although it's not the largest air museum you could go to, the quality of the restoration that they do and the quality of the displays is impeccable. But really, even bigger than that to me was the obvious respect that they show and the dedication to not losing the memory of the veterans who flew these machines. So it's more than just about the machines here. It's about the veterans and the debt that we owe them. And that's why I was so excited to come back here. I think we should all give a round of applause to the museum staff for the great job they're doing, please. One thing I didn't know when they invited me down here was that I would be in the midst of all these legends and these true American heroes here. And it's very humbling for me to be here and share the stage with them. When you go through test pilot school, you learn about some of these achievements, you learn about these individuals, and we're always conscious that we're standing on the shoulders of these giants. But I'm humbled to be here. I'm not sure I'm worthy to be sharing the stage, but I'll keep my remarks short for you. They asked me to say a few things about the F-104 and Edwards Air Force Base, and that is appropriate because, like so many aircraft, the 104 started and ended its career at Edwards. So the first flight of the F-104 was right up there at Edwards, and that was in March of 1954. although there is a little controversy about that because there was a high-speed taxi test that was supposed to remain on the ground, and he maybe got a little excited, and he did get airborne on that one. I don't know if that was Levere that was mentioned earlier, or if he was the official first flight in March of 1954. There were essentially two first flights. One was really supposed to be a taxi test. And then to close its career, at least its active duty career, the F-104 flew its final Air Force active duty flight from Edwards Air Force Base down to Davis-Monthan to enter what's known as the Boneyard for retirement. And that was in December of 1973. So there were not quite 20 years there where this aircraft was flying at Edwards Air Force Base. And in that time, it was integral to the testing that was going on up there at Edwards. The list of achievements was immense. You've heard a lot of them already, but I'll just hit some of the highlights. So one that was not mentioned was that in July 1963, there was an F-104 that successfully demonstrated zero-length launch in that it was mounted on a platform vertically and shot with a solid rocket motor like a bottle rocket until it reached enough speed to be airborne under its own power and then continue on. And when I think about the safety planning and the technical planning that we do for tests today, I can't imagine ever approving this one to go. But back then, during the Cold War, we did some things, we took risks that we would not take today, and that was the nature of the threat and the nature of what needed to be done, and these heroes did it. So again, that's something that just is awe-inspiring to me to think about. As you also heard, this aircraft set 3 world records during its time for altitude, speed, and time to climb, and those records stood for quite a while. The aircraft is also famous for the NF-104 variant, which had the rocket motor on the tail. It had reaction jets or puffer jets in the wings and in the nose so that it would be able to maneuver above the atmosphere where the normal control surfaces don't have any effect anymore. And that's the one that was already talked about that General Yeager had to eject out of, and it was a famous scene from the Right Stuff movie. That is a true story. Finally, the aircraft for quite some time was used to train test pilot school students and other test pilots and to chase many of the programs that were flying up there, like the SR-71, the X-15, and the XB-70. And essentially, if there was a new aircraft that was going to be flying higher and faster than anything else, then the F-104 was really the only thing that would have a hope of chasing it. And so it did great service for us in that role as well. So given all that Edwards history that's ingrained in this aircraft, it's been a great pleasure for me to be here today. But really, it's a tribute to the heroes who flew it and all the heroes that we honor on Veterans Day next week. Please keep them in your thoughts and your prayers, especially those who, like Norm Schmidt, gave the ultimate sacrifice. Thank you.
I'm going to wrap up here. I've got a few little bit of housekeeping, but can we get a standing ovation for the Colonel here and all our folks that are active duty? Thank you for your service. We are grateful. And please let your command know how much we appreciate the fact that we are keeping the legacy alive and that you were here. It means a lot to all of us. Well, now comes the acceptance of the aircraft into our inventory. And so if I could get our staff to remove the cover on the aircraft, ladies and gentlemen, I present the F-104. And we always talk about, is it going to hook? And this time it did. I'd also like, if we could get the staff, Bob and Buzz, you are being inducted into our Hall of Fame, our Pilot Hall, Aviator Hall of Fame. And so we could take off the 2 images that will forever be in our Aviator Hall of Fame. There they are. Maybe if I get Greg to come around, we get Bob and Buzz up here. Come on up here. We're going to accept it. Gentlemen, your tour is over. Especially Bob, your tour is over. Come on up here. We're going to pop the cork. And in traditional, although I'm not going to douse you in champagne, we are going to do a traditional toast to you. The end of a good, successful tour, gentlemen. Pictures, if you want to get them, please. There we go. Thank you, sir. That was wonderful. No, you don't shoot the champagne, Buzz. We'll be good. There we go. Ladies and gentlemen, our newest inductees. Why don't you go over, they'll stand next to the portraits. You're gonna get pictures again. If you can't get a picture, take a mental image. This is the kind of stuff that we do here, and these gentlemen will live on forever. One last thing we have to do here. How many F-104 drivers do I have in the room?
Gentlemen here, we got suitcase over here.
We'll get a suitcase in there, we'll get them all in there. Gentlemen, 104 drivers, name and unit, please. Name, rank, unit.
You should see what I drink.
We got plenty of champagne, Buzz.
There you go, Buzz.
There you go. As I said, if you want to get pictures, this is an opportunity to do it. This is not going to happen again.
Where's suitcase? Didn't put lock. Oh, he's pouring your way.
Phil?
He'll do it for him.
Rob's going to do it. All right, Rob. Okay, suitcase, you gotta get up here. Get on in there, suitcase. Suitcase Simpson.
Be careful, suitcase.
All right, we got him.
You said you should see what I drink.
There we go. There we go. Phil, you want to get in there? Go ahead.
How you doing?
Okay, go ahead, Phil.
Jordan, there's so much fun. We talked for a half hour. We'll do it again. We'll do it again. We get together for lunch. We'll look forward to it.
You can see the aircraft is dedicated to Norm Schmidt. Want to get Marie up here as well. Marie, if you'll come up and sign the aircraft.
Here we go, Marie. Get up there on, how about over on this side?
Thank you.
It's right underneath.
Yes. I'm Robert Gillen. I'm Bob's son here. And,
Yes.
And then he was telling me you knew Norm. You know Norm Gaddis, General Gaddis. Yeah, he's a great guy.
Marie, thank you so much.
Yeah.
He was SRO. We got shut down. But he was trying to do it. I've been hearing about you all these years. I hear about your stuff right now.
Marie, make sure you put your name on there too here. I'll let you get away that easy.
We give him one of those cards.
That's good, you got it. Thank you.
You got it. All right.
You gotta do it, you did your thing.
Get up in there, get your name on there. Any more F-104 drivers?
Well, still in post 59.
Now remember, we've got birthday cake.
For those of you on a sugar rush, we got birthday cake here for the museum's anniversary. Now remember, these airplanes all need a home. So if you're not a member, we want you to be a member. We got other airplanes to dedicate. Let's get Bob, you want to pose there for pictures? This concludes our ceremony for today.
Thank you.
Come on up here and talk to the pilots. Thank you very much for visiting the museum. We've got a few more of these this year. Come back and see us. Have a wonderful day.